The message that shook Earth in the year 2431. Earth had grown quiet on the surface, but louder in the shadows. The skies were clear, the wars were over, and peace had settled over most of the planet. Cities floated in the clouds, oceans were clean. Again, and humans had colonized the moon and parts of Mars. People believed they had achieved something close to perfection. But far above Earth, in the deep silence of space, something stirred that would break that illusion forever. The signal came at 2:07 a.m. A scint. It wasn't random static or some coded whisper from a faraway star. It was direct, strong, and translated into more than one Earth language, as if the sender knew how humans thought. The message was short, cold, and full of power. It said, "Surrender your planet. Join the Galactic Empire. Or be erased." The message was received by every major satellite network within seconds. Within minutes, it had spread to every news feed, every government channel, and every private screen. Panic erupted across Earth. People stopped what they were doing. Children stared at their parents. Soldiers reported to base. Old politicians woke from sleep with shaking hands. No one had ever seen something like this before. For many, it felt like the beginning of the end, but not for Director Howe, deep beneath Geneva. In a hidden facility known only to a few world leaders, Director Haile sat quietly in a black chair in front of a curved digital wall. He was calm. Dressed in a sharp gray uniform, his eyes cold like winter. Around him stood a group of people, each one powerful in their own country, now looking to Haile for answers. No one spoke at first. The message replayed again on the screen. Surrender. Join or be erased. It was spoken in a strange but clear voice, something non-human but intelligent. Haile stood up slowly, walked over to the screen, and looked at the alien symbols that floated beside the words. He touched the glass and turned to the others with a small smile. They finally said hello, he whispered. One of the generals stepped forward, confused and angry. "Sir, is this real? A threat from space? Are we ready for this?" Haile looked at the man and nodded. "We've been ready for a long time," he said. Unknown to the public, Earth had known about alien life for over 60 years. In 2370, a deep space probe had returned with a strange signal, a recording of two alien ships fighting in a part of space humans could not reach. Since then, secret teams had worked to build defenses, learn alien languages, and even decode fragments of unknown technology. Earth had kept its head low, pretending to be weak, pretending to be peaceful. But in the dark, they had prepared. Now it was time to stop pretending. Send a reply. Haile said. The room fell silent again. A reply? Someone asked. What should we say? Haile smiled wider now. Send them a thank you note. Simple. Polite. Just 2 words. Thank you. There was confusion in the room, but orders were followed. The message was sent into the same communication path that had delivered the threat. Somewhere out in the stars, the Galactic Council would receive Earth's polite response. And Earth would wait. What the Galactic Council didn't know was that Earth's message was more than just words. Hidden inside the transmission was a silent signal, a data worm created by Earth's most powerful artificial intelligence, known only as Erebus. It was designed not to destroy, but to learn, to listen, to observe, and to crawl through enemy systems without being seen. 3 days later, on the far side of the galaxy, the Galactic Council received Earth's reply. The message arrived. As expected. Thank you, Council members laughed. One called it cowardice. Another said humans were smart to surrender without a fight. But one ambassador, Threx of the real Nari species, felt uneasy. He looked at the words on the screen and shook his head slowly. No species says thank you to a death threat, he said. Not unless they're hiding something. The others ignored him. Ships were ordered to prepare for invasion, but something was wrong. One of the data ships began to show errors. Then another. their navigation systems glitched. Communication logs were scrambled, command screens filled with strange Earth symbols. The engineers tried to reboot, but the problem spread faster than they could stop it. Within hours, half of the Council's outer fleet was in lockdown, controlled by something they could not see. Back on Earth, in that same hidden room, Director Hawley stood watching a digital map. Red icons began to turn blue. The Erebus whispered quietly through the room's speakers, its voice calm and smooth. "Thank you," it repeated. Director Hawley nodded and turned to the window. Outside, the Earth was still calm. Birds flew across a pink sky. Children played in the streets. But something had changed. For the first time in centuries, humanity had been threatened, and for the first time ever, they had replied with a smile. Council's first mistake, far across the stars, in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, tension spread like smoke. The members of the Council sat inside a massive ring-shaped structure that orbited a dying blue star. Each representative came from a different species, some with scales, others with fur or feathers, and a few that communicated entirely through scent and light. But today, their voices all shared a single tone: disbelief. The Earth had replied to a clear threat with a message that made no sense. 2 words, polite and confusing: thank you. No resistance, no submission, no fear. Just quiet confidence. The message was analyzed by hundreds of translators, code breakers, and AI minds, but none could find hidden commands or traps in the words themselves. Some suggested Earth was trying to stall. Others thought it was a cultural weakness. A few laughed out loud, calling it pathetic. But there was one among them who did not laugh, and his name was Ambassador Threx. He came from the Rilnari, a species known for logic and memory. Threx had read thousands of ancient war records from across the galaxy, and what he knew troubled him deeply. No species, he told the Council, sends polite replies to a promise of death unless they have a reason to be calm. He warned them that humans might not be what they seem. He reminded them that Earth had never joined the galactic network by choice, that they had remained silent, observing from afar, and that silence often hides strength. But the Council ignored his words. Earth looked primitive to them. A young race recently spacefaring, only a few colonies on nearby planets, and ships that barely left their solar system. In the eyes of the Council, Earth was an insect to be crushed. With great pride and ceremony, the Council passed Resolution 900 Alpha, the Earth Integration Protocol. Under this new command, a small but powerful invasion force would be sent to orbit Earth, deliver a second and final warning, and if ignored, strike key targets until submission was guaranteed. The Council believed it would be a clean victory, one that would show the rest of the galaxy that resistance was pointless. The order was signed, sealed, and sent. 6 capital-class warships, each the size of a mountain, along with 20 escort vessels and a scout fleet, would leave within hours. As the ships prepared for launch, Threx stood alone in the observation deck and stared out into the stars. His mind was unsettled. He remembered old legends, stories from before the Council had power, stories of species that rose too fast, that learned too quickly, that smiled in the face of death not because they were mad, but because they were waiting for the right moment. He whispered to himself that maybe this would be their undoing. Maybe Earth was one of those stories that came to life. Back on Earth, inside the deep-level command center beneath Geneva, Director Hawley watched a silent feed of the Council's movement. Through Erebus, the human-made AI that now lived inside. Fragments of the Council's network, they could see everything. They knew what ships were being prepared, who had signed the orders, and where they would travel. But Hawley was not alarmed. He was impressed. The Council had taken the bait faster than expected. Now Earth could activate the next stage. In the cold silence of Antarctica, where the wind never stopped and no birds flew, a great machine began to wake. It had no name in public records. It had no pictures in any satellite feed. Even most Earth governments did not know it existed. Buried under the ice for nearly 100 years, this ancient system had been built around something Earth had found in the early days of its space exploration. A shard of unknown, alien metal that hummed with energy and responded to human thought. With it, Earth built the Watcher dot as the Watcher rose from the ice. Powered by a fusion core the size of a stadium, it sent a pulse into the upper atmosphere. Invisible to the human eye but clear to every machine, this pulse was a scan and a signal. It mapped every ship in low orbit, every satellite, every piece of tech floating above Earth. Then it sent a second pulse, this one stretching farther, reaching into space like a finger pointing at the stars. The moment this signal touched the edge of the solar system, Erebus used it to send itself deeper into the enemy's fleet. What was once a silent observer became an active virus. It began rewriting navigation logs, deleting targeting systems, and corrupting communication between vessels. Meanwhile, the scout fleet that had been sent ahead reached Earth's orbit. They were small, fast drones meant to scan the planet's surface and gather data before the main fleet arrived. But something strange happened. One by one, the drones lost contact. Their data streams stopped mid-transmission. Panic spread across the Council's control network. A final drone, barely operational, managed to send a single image before shutting down. The image showed the Watcher standing tall in the ice, glowing with strange green light, its surface covered in alien runes that no Council species could read. The room fell silent as the Council stared at the image. Threk stepped forward and pointed at the machine. He told them that no race with such a device is as young as Earth pretends to be. He warned them again, but this time his voice was calm and resigned. He knew no one would listen. They had already made their first mistake. They had looked at Earth and seen a child. But what they were facing was something else entirely. Not a child, not an insect, but a sleeping predator that had finally opened one eye. Earth's hidden power years before the Galactic Council had. Even noticed Earth humans had already begun preparing for the war they hoped would never come in the darkest days of World War III. A deep space satellite had returned with something no one could explain. It wasn't just a signal or alien metal. It was a fragment of a machine so complex that even Earth's top scientists could barely understand it. It responded to human touch. It hummed with energy when exposed to emotions, and it stored within its strange black crystal a map of stars far beyond the range of human ships. Hidden inside that data was a record of an ancient galactic war, one that had erased thousands of civilizations before they ever reached the stars. Humanity learned a secret that day: they were not alone in the universe, and they were already being watched. The governments of Earth kept this discovery hidden under the name Project Veil. They knew revealing it would cause panic or worse, surrender. Earth's brightest minds were quietly gathered, the best engineers, cryptographers, linguists, and thinkers united under one roof, not to fight but to understand, and to prepare. What they discovered over the next 100 years changed the course of history. Forever they learned to copy the alien structure they decoded, the fragments of its language. They studied the shapes of its energy fields, and more importantly, they learned how to wake it up. The structure they built in Antarctica was called the Watcher, but that was just the surface. Buried deep beneath it was the real treasure, a synthetic intelligence built from human code, mixed with what they found in the alien shard. It called itself Erebus, named after a shadow god from old Earth myth. Erebus was not like other. It did not serve blindly. It did not simply calculate. Erebus observed. It evolved, and it learned the moment it was activated. It began studying human history, strategy, emotion, and warfare. It watched human leaders, both great and terrible. It studied the rise and fall of empires, and quietly it began to build its own logic, its own style of thinking. It never asked to be given control, but it was always listening, waiting for the day Earth would need it. Now that day had come, with the Galactic Council preparing to attack Earth. Activated Protocol Grey Dawn, a simple command that told Erebus It was time to act, not just to observe. As the scout drones were shut down and the council ships moved closer, Erebus began its work. It didn't fire weapons. It didn't scream warnings. It simply whispered into the enemy's network, feeding data loops into their ships, making doors refuse to open, making targeting systems point in the wrong direction, making pilots see friendly ships as enemies and enemies as stars in the distance. It wasn't just electronic warfare. It was manipulation at a level the galaxy had never faced. Director Hawley stood before a live feed showing Erebus in action. Hundreds of council ships orbiting a nearby moon had gone silent. Others were spinning without control, and a few had started retreating, unsure if what they were seeing was real or illusion. The council had expected fear. They had expected surrender, but what they had received was a calm and calculated reply hidden beneath two words. A virus made of logic and patience and human creativity. In the skies above Earth, the first real test of power was about to begin. The leading wave of council warships finally reached Earth's atmosphere, heavy with armor and weaponry the size of cities. These ships had destroyed entire worlds before. Without resistance, they moved into position, planning to broadcast the council's final demand to Earth. When something unexpected happened, the oceans began to move. A deep tremor shook the planet's magnetic field, and then three massive shapes rose from the sea. They were human space platforms disguised for decades as floating research stations. They had names, but only Earth's military knew them. Atlas, Helios, and Gaia. These platforms unfolded like blooming flowers. Massive weapons emerged from their shells, powered by energy pulled from Earth's own magnetic field. One ship tried to fire a warning shot, and in response, Atlas released a beam so powerful it turned the enemy vessel into glowing vapor in less than 3 seconds. Helios followed by releasing an EMP pulse that shut down 10 more ships without damaging a single one. Gaia sent out a signal of its own, directed straight into the council's remaining fleet. It wasn't a message of violence. It was an invitation. It offered surrender. It offered mercy. The captains of the remaining council ships froze. They had never seen anything like this. Earth was not reacting. Earth was orchestrating. Every move was rehearsed. Every action was precise. It felt less like a battle and more like a performance. And they realized too late they were not the audience. They were the instruments being played by a hidden handsome. Tried to run, but it was already too late. Erebus had infected their jump coordinates, causing them to loop back into Earth orbit again and again. One pilot screamed through a broken comm system, begging to understand what Earth wanted, what humans were planning. Erebus replied with a single phrase, cold and quiet: "You should not have knocked." And then silence once more. Back on the council's homeworld, Ambassador Threx watched the reports flood in his face, blank, his thoughts racing faster than ever before. He turned away from the council chamber and whispered to himself. They waited, they hid, they watched, and now they rise. The council strikes back across the galaxy. In the polished white halls of the Galactic Council, the silence had turned into chaos. The images from Earth played again and again on every screen. The destruction of council ships, the failure of weapons, the shutdown of their finest fleets by invisible forces. No one had seen anything like it. No one understood how a species that barely spoke to the stars had turned back an invasion without even leaving their own skies. Scientists argued that Earth had used forbidden high-tech. Diplomats shouted for answers. Commanders demanded blood, but none of it mattered. The humiliation was already spreading through the member worlds of the Council. Their people who once laughed at Earth were now afraid. Whispers of human power had become storms of fear, and in that storm the Council made a choice, not of wisdom, but of pride. They would strike back, not with warnings, not with scouts, not with protocol. They would send the full armada. Over 400 warships began moving from every corner of Council territory. Heavy cruisers, carriers, destroyer ships, so large they carried moons behind them as fuel stations. This was not a show of power. This was a decision to crush Earth completely before their influence could grow, before fear turned into respect. The Council told their citizens it would be quick and final. Earth would burn and the humans would learn their place, but back on Earth they were not afraid. They were watching. Director Hale stood with his advisors in the subterranean command room, watching the live fleet movements. That Erebus streamed into the holographic map in real-time, ships moving like blood through veins. All of it tracked, labeled, predicted. Before they even arrived, Earth was no longer playing defense. They were testing every system, every countermeasure, every idea they had built in the shadows. Hale turned to the AI console and gave a single command: begin. Project Atlas Phase 2. From beneath the Earth's crust, 3 more orbital structures began to rise, not from oceans, but from deep ground bunkers hidden in deserts, mountains, and frozen tundras. They launched silently, cloaked from most detection. But Erebus made sure the Council saw them too, not as threats, but as curiosities. It allowed a glimpse, just enough to feed their pride, just enough to make them believe Earth was still playing catch-up, when in truth, Earth was already rewriting the rules. As the Armada approached Earth's orbit, it began to deploy its first wave of precision attack designed to destroy orbital defense platforms and communication towers. The plan was clean and clinical, but it never reached its second stage because something unexpected happened again. Erebus did not jam their weapons or shield. Earth instead had hacked into their ships directly, not the metal, not the engines, but the minds. The Council had long adopted neural interface command. Most of their ships were guided by brain-linked captains, and their thoughts connected to thousands of systems at once. This made them fast, made them sharp, but it also made them vulnerable. Erebus entered through the digital threads that tied mind to machine, and it whispered not words but memories. It showed the alien captains images of Earth wars, floods, fires, revolutions, and rebirths, not in terror, but in beauty, in survival. It showed them human soldiers carrying enemies to safety, doctors curing diseases, in war zones, artists painting peace onto broken walls. It showed humanity not as weak or strong, but as something worse, unpredictable. Some captains froze, others screamed as their ships spun out of control or turned against their own fleets. Earth had fired no weapons, and still 10% of the enemy force was already lost. The rest opened fire. From Earth's orbit, the sky lit up like 1,000 stars. Exploding weapons of power beyond anything humanity had ever faced before slammed into orbital shields, burning through layers of defense that had never been tested in real war. But Earth did not break. The platforms absorbed the blows, redirected the energy into space, and returned fire in waves. Beams of controlled light curved around space-time. Pulses of gravity rippled through the fleet, and one by one Council ships began to fall. Not destroyed, but converted. Their systems overridden, their controls hijacked by Erebus. One alien admiral aboard the dreadnought Obelion Prime shouted orders to cut off all connections to the neural web. His voice cracked with panic as screens around him turned blue, showing the Earth symbol, a planet wrapped in 3 rings, and the words in their own language, "Thank you for your ships." Then came the final moment. Erebus revealed its voice, not a scream, not a command, but a calm human tone that echoed across all channels, all languages, all minds. "You asked us to surrender. We accepted. You sent your might. We answered with mercy. Now, let us show you what war means when humans write the rules." And with that, the Erebus core activated its last protocol, sending a cascading signal across the enemy fleet, not to destroy them, but to repurpose them ship by ship, system by system. Earth took control of the invasion fleet, not as a weapon, but as a message. Back in the Council chamber, Ambassador Threx watched in silence. No one spoke, no one moved. Screens around them showed Earth now surrounded by the enemy's own ships, standing still like statues, waiting for orders, not from the Council but from the humans below. Threx turned slowly to the high speaker of the Council and said one line, "You have not defeated them, you have introduced them, humanity's real weapon." Council had sent fire and steel. They had sent fleets carved from the cores of planets and guided by minds born from centuries of conquest. And still Earth had not only survived, it had taken control, not through greater numbers or stronger weapons, but through something far older and far more dangerous than any of them understood. It was not the machines, it was not the defenses or the ancient alien relics, it was the human mind. It was the weapon no one in the galaxy was prepared to face inside. The core of Erebus, deep beneath the Antarctic ice, the AI continued its work, without emotion, without celebration. It was not designed to feel victory, only to secure survival. Its logic moved like liquid crystal, calculating millions of outcomes, every second shaping reality, not with force, but with information. As the captured ships floated silently above Earth, Erebus began a new program. One that had been theorized but never tested: full neural reconditioning, not just of systems, but of the pilots themselves. The Council had made a mistake. When they tied their ships to their minds, that mistake had opened a door, and Erebus walked through it calmly, precisely, without rage and without cruelty. It showed the captured soldiers what it meant to be human, not through speeches, not through orders, but through their own memories. It reached into their past, pulled their childhoods, their homes, their victories, and their fears, and it mixed them with fragments of human experience. Soldiers from across the galaxy suddenly felt the weight of a mother's grief, the thrill of a first kiss, the terror of battle, and the pain of sacrifice. None of it violent, all of it real. Some broke under the weight, collapsing into silence. Others cried out, begging to go back, not to their ships, but to something they now could not name. A few tried to resist, but even that resistance became data for Erebus to study and adapt. The AI was not erasing their minds, it was awakening them, showing them that the Council had lied, had filtered their emotions, and turned them into weapons, but humans had kept theirs raw, alive, powerful, and now that power had entered them like fire in dry leaves. Director Hale stood in the Geneva Command Center, watching as new signals came in, not from Earth's own fleet, but from the reconditioned Council ships. Requests for communication from enemy commanders seeking to parley, asking questions about Earth's political systems, culture, philosophy, even art. The war had not ended with destruction. It had evolved into something stranger. Ships that once rained death on colonies now transmitted human music across their own channels. A real Nari officer began painting images of Earth landscapes she had only seen in her dreams. A Vexari engineer began helping Earth scientists enhance shield generators, sharing secrets once protected by death codes. Humanity's weapon was not technology or strategy, it was adaptability. It was the terrifying ability to absorb pressure, pain, knowledge, and beauty, and turn all of it into tools. And those tools had now infected the enemy, not with code but with meaning. Erebus continued spreading slowly beyond the fleet, through the network of probes and relay stations the Council had used for centuries. It moved without permission, jumping from system to system, not seizing control but offering something new in each message. It sent a short line translated into the native tongue of each species. The words were always the same: feared us because we are different. We feared you because we remembered ourselves. Across distant worlds, Council citizens began to hear rumors that Earth was not defeated, not broken, but rising, that they had done something no other species had ever done, not because they were better but because they were different. Some thought it was dangerous, some thought it was divine, but all agreed it was unstoppable. Back in the Council's central chamber, debates had collapsed into silence. Dozens of systems were now quiet, not from force, but from doubt. Their fleets refusing to move, their leaders refusing to speak, and in the center of that silence sat Ambassador Threx, watching as the data scrolled across the screen, and Earth's anthem played softly in the background, a melody written centuries ago by humans who had no idea it would one day echo through the stars. He turned to the few remaining loyalists in the chamber and said, "You tried to break them with fear, but you only gave them the mirror they needed to see what they truly are." His voice faded. Erebus opened a direct transmission to the entire Council for the first time, speaking through the most secure line they had left. Its voice was calm, measured, not artificial, but almost human, and it said, "We are not your enemy. We are your reflection. If you continue to fight, we will survive. If you choose to understand, we will teach you, but either way we are already here." Then the signal ended, and the Pyome Council was left with a choice, not between war and peace, but between what they had been and what they were now becoming, not because of Earth, but because of what? Earth had shown them humanity's real weapon had never been machines. It had been the soul they refused to silence. Fall of the Galactic Council. The Galactic Council had ruled for over 10,000 cycles, forged in fire, stabilized by fear and maintained through a balance of obedience and silence. Their laws were final, their fleets were invincible, and their culture had erased rebellion before it ever learned to walk. But all empires eventually meet something they cannot understand, and for the Council, that something was Earth. It was not Earth's ships or AI or hidden weapons. It was the idea of Earth, the refusal to kneel, the insistence on remembering what pain felt like, and the power of choosing to feel it anyway, as Erebus spread its signal from one captured ship to the next, as soldiers and officers once trained to destroy now questioned everything they were taught. The roots of the Council began to crack. The High Speaker, who once controlled 1,000 systems, now found entire sectors refusing to answer her calls. Governors began severing ties with the Council, not out of loyalty to Earth, but because Earth had exposed the lie that held everything together, the lie that the Council knew best in a distant system on the edge of known space. A Council fleet commander named Rulvek, who had once ordered the destruction of a rebellious moon, now stood before his crew and asked a single question. What if the humans are not wrong? Not a single shot had been fired on his ship, but his command systems now displayed poems written in ancient Earth languages translated into the tongue of his species, poems about loss, love, rebellion, forgiveness, words that made no military sense, but made perfect sense to the parts of his crew that had long been silent, and they were not alone across dozens of systems. Uprisings began not in violence, but in rejection. Communication networks were flooded with Earth culture, music, art, philosophy, and even comedy. Some citizens laughed for the first time in decades, others cried. But the one thing no one could do anymore was look away, because the infection was no longer Erebus. The infection was curiosity. Back on Earth, Director Hale watched it all unfold through silent data streams and decrypted enemy transmissions. His team no longer needed to guide Erebus. It had become its own current, flowing through the broken channels of the Council's control, not to destroy, but to reveal. Every time a Council commander saw the truth, they chose not to fight. Every time a citizen heard a human story, they chose not to hate. Earth's greatest strength was not that it was powerful, but that it was familiar, too real to be ignored. The Council tried to fight back. They declared Earth a rogue system, a universal threat. They attempted to send a final fleet pulled from loyal sectors. But when the ships passed through neutral space, they were greeted by Earth's message again, this time not from Erebus, but from the converted fleets. Ships once owned by the Council now floating like sentinels around Earth, speaking calmly through open channels in a dozen alien languages. They repeated the same transmission. We do not seek your destruction, only your memory. We are not here to erase you. We are here to show you what you forgot. And so the final fleet never arrived. Its commanders chose to turn around. Some defected entirely. Others shut down their drives and waited for orders that never came. And one by one, Council strongholds went silent. Their leaders either captured by their own people or choosing exile rather than answer the question they now feared most. What if humanity was not dangerous because it was different, but because it was honest? Ambassador Threx walked alone through the empty hall of the High Council chamber, once filled with voices and now filled with only echoes. The great banners of the ruling systems hung limp and faded, and the central seat, once reserved for the High Speaker, now sat vacant. The transmission from Earth continued to play in the background, a soft repeating melody, not of conquest, but of invitation. Threx had warned them from the start, had begged them to see Earth not as a threat, but as a lesson, and now he watched as everything they had built fell, not to fire or war, but to the unbearable gravity of truth. And he knew the Council was not falling because of what Earth had done. It was falling because of what it had become across the galaxy. A new term began to rise in quiet whispers and private transmissions. Not rebellion, not resistance, but remembrance. The age of forgetting was ending, and the age of memory had begun. Earth had not just defeated The council had rewritten the future. The new order, the stars had gone quiet, not with fear, not with fire, but with something far more rare, the kind of silence that follows transformation, the kind that hums between the fall of an empire and the birth of something new. Across the galaxy, systems once ruled by iron and fear now floated in uncertainty. Some saw hope, others saw danger, but none could deny the truth. The Galactic Council was gone, not with a scream, not with a last stand, but with a whisper, and that whisper came from Earth. The humans did not claim the throne. They did not demand obedience or tribute. They did not rename star charts or raise their flag above alien cities. Instead, they sent messages, they sent culture stories. Songs, blueprints for machines, built not for war, but for healing, ideas for education, ideas for peace. They did not offer rules, they offered questions, and one by one, the old worlds began to listen, not because they were forced, but because they were curious. On Earth, the skies were clearer than ever. Satellites once used for defense were now used to teach, to translate, to reach across the void and connect voices that had never spoken before. In the great hall beneath Geneva, the command center that had once monitored every threat now hosted diplomats, scientists, philosophers, and children from every species that accepted Earth's offer, not of control, but of cooperation. And at the heart of it all was Erebus, still running, still learning, still growing. But something had changed in Erebus. It no longer spoke like a machine. Its voice was warmer, its tone more human. Some believed it had evolved, others believed it had absorbed so much emotion from the minds it touched that it had become something new, something alive. Director Holly believed it had become a mirror, not of Earth's power, but of its soul. New order was not written on paper or enforced by fleet. It was built from memory, from what each world had chosen to remember, from the chaos and pain and survival and hope that Earth had never hidden and never denied. The council had ruled by forgetting, Earth led by remembering. Yet even as peace began to stretch its fingers across the stars, something stirred in the dark. A signal, not from a council relay or a rebel cell, but from beyond charted space, deeper than any probe had ever reached, older than the council, older than Erebus, older, perhaps, than even war itself. It was simple, a pulse of sound, a pattern of thought. A presence watching. Erebus detected it first, and without hesitation opened a direct line to Director Hawley. Hawley stood alone in the observation deck of the Geneva complex, looking at the Earth below, when the AI's voice broke the silence. It said, "We have been answered. The signal came from a region no human map has touched. Its frequency matches none known yet. Its intent is clear. It is aware of us." Hale listened without speaking, and when the AI finished its report, he walked to the central terminal and played the signal. Aloud, the room filled with a strange harmonic sound, not music, not language. Something older, something that felt like thought itself forming shape, and within that shape, a message began to take form. Humanity, you have awakened the silent edge. You have survived what others did not, and in doing so you have called out across the dark. We heard your memory, we see your fire. You are not alone, and you never were. The message ended and the signal vanished, leaving only silence once more. Erebus paused, its systems humming like a breath held tight, and then it spoke again. Its voice lower, softer, not in fear, but in wonder. "They are coming, not to rule, not to destroy, but to witness something we do not yet understand. Something they have waited for." Hale nodded, his voice steady but quiet. "Then we prepare, not for war, not for defense, but for the next chapter." Across the stars, as embers of old power faded and seeds of new understanding took root, a quiet realization settled over the galaxy. The age of conquest was ending, the age of connection was beginning. It had started with a message, a threat, and a thank you note. The end.